Prince's last Diddy recording played in trial. Prince was going to expose him.
You know that feeling when a courtroom stops breathing? That's what happened the moment the prosecution said, "We'd now like to submit a voice recording into evidence," featuring Prince Rogers Nelson. This story is far from over. The trial is just getting started, and every day brings new revelations. If you want to stay informed and ahead of the headlines, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We're covering the courtroom, the fallout, and what this means for the future of hip-hop. Don't miss a beat. Subscribe now. Gasps. Audible gasps. Even the judge leaned back in his chair. You could feel the courtroom tilt. No one expected that name. Not here. Not now. Not like this. Because when a man like Prince, someone known for his secrecy, for protecting his privacy like it was sacred, has his voice played from beyond the grave, you know it's not for some light commentary. This wasn't hearsay. This was a posthumous mic drop. And it shattered whatever composure Diddy had left. Let's rewind. According to the prosecution, the recording was discovered in 2023 among digital archives submitted by one of Prince's former legal aides, someone who had access to encrypted backups that had never been made public. The audio. A voicemail file. Clear. Unedited. Time-stamped. And most importantly, unnamed in court records until now. And when it played, it changed everything. Prince's voice crackled into the courtroom. Low. Measured. Hauntingly calm. There's something broken in this business. And some of us have seen too much. The room froze. You could hear the click of every juror's pen stop at once. I've seen what happens behind those closed doors. You think these parties are just about music? They're not. They're about control. They're about manipulation. They're about young artists being broken so they'll never say no. He didn't name Diddy immediately. But he didn't have to. The references were precise. The cities. The years. The guest lists. Prince walked listeners through parties he attended between 2009 and 2013, describing a very specific pattern of behavior by a major hip-hop mogul who traffics in influence and fear. Then came the line. Sean Combs runs his circle like a cult. The parties, the jets, the hotel floors, all smoke. What happens is orchestrated. The kids, they don't know any better. Some don't even survive it emotionally. Cue meltdown. Diddy, who had been slouched in his seat up until that moment, snapped upright like a bolt of electricity hit him. His lips started moving. Fast. Whispering to his attorneys. Gripping the edge of the defense table. He tried to object. He tried to object to a voice from the dead. The judge. Shut it down. Sit down, Mr. Combs. Let the evidence play. And so it did. Because here's what people didn't know about Prince. He didn't just observe. He documented. And on this tape, he talked about seeing Cassie at one of those events. Not by name, but by description. The girl with the soft voice who never spoke unless spoken to. He said he remembered her because she looked like she wanted to disappear. And in a case already soaked in allegations of grooming, coercion, and psychological abuse, that line hit like a dagger. The prosecution knew exactly what they were doing. They didn't roll out the Prince tape during opening statements. They waited. They let Diddy get comfortable. They let him smirk through Cassie's testimony. They let him scoff at Justin Bieber's emotional support statement. And then, just when he thought he had weathered the worst, they hit play. Strategic. Surgical. Savage. You could feel the oxygen vanish from the room. Because how do you cross-examine Prince? You can't. You can't call him a bitter ex. You can't accuse him of clout chasing. You can't gaslight a dead man whose only motive seems to be warning people about the rot under Hollywood's glitter. And you definitely can't ignore it when the entire jury is leaning forward, clinging to every word. Prince didn't just describe parties. He described a system. How girls were flown out. How phones were taken. How NDA papers were slipped in between catering menus and appearance agreements. How artists who refused to play along stopped getting invited to award shows. Or suddenly had drug problems leak to TMZ. Sound familiar? It echoed every claim Cassie made. It mirrored what the former intern Kay said just a day earlier. And it supported Justin Bieber's own words about the way people disappeared inside Diddy's circle and came out as someone else. And then Prince said this. They protect each other. The powerful. They laugh at these kids like it's a game. But it's not a game. It's a machine. And if you don't play by the rules, they chew you up. Silence. Then static. Then nothing. The recording ended. And Diddy was sweating. Not metaphorically. Literally. Courtroom sketch artists didn't even try to hide it. They drew him wide-eyed, shirt collar damp, mouth half open like a man trying to process a haunting. Because that's what Prince's voice had become. A ghost dragging truth into the light. Immediately after the recording ended, the prosecution turned to the judge and said, "We rest for today." Mic dropped. Because there's no following that. You don't pivot from Prince's graveyard testimony to legal technicalities. You don't try to spin that for the media. You don't walk out of that courtroom with swagger. You walk out exposed. And Diddy didn't even walk out. He had to be escorted by his own security after a brief recess was called, not for evidence review, but for Diddy's well-being. Yes, the court had to call a wellness break. Because the tape broke something in him. Not just his strategy. Not just his composure. His illusion. The illusion that he was still in control. That he could laugh his way out. Dance his way out. Money his way out. Not today. Today, Prince spoke. And Diddy crumbled. The next morning, media around the globe had one question. What else is in Prince's vault? Because if this one file, one voicemail, can drop into a courtroom and explode a defense in 12 minutes flat, what else did he know? Who else did he record? And if Diddy is just the first? Who's next? Because let's not pretend Prince was petty. Prince was watching. And when you spend decades swimming through the poison of the industry, watching friends die, watching art get sold, watching kids get fed to wolves in exchange for clout, you eventually start to leave clues. Not for revenge. For justice. And it looks like those clues? They're starting to surface. When court resumed after the bombshell Prince recording, it wasn't just Diddy's reputation that was on life support, it was the very spine of his defense strategy. You could feel it. The gallery wasn't just full of press anymore. It was filled with silence. That rare kind of silence that doesn't come from respect, but from sheer disbelief. Everyone in that room had just heard the voice of one of the most legendary, tight-lipped figures in music history draw a direct line between industry glamour and systemic abuse. And Diddy, he couldn't even look up. Not at the judge. Not at the jury. Not even at his own lawyers, who were now in full damage control mode, flipping through binders like someone had rewritten the script mid-trial. Spoiler alert, someone had. And his name was Prince. It became clear immediately that the prosecution had outmaneuvered Diddy's team in every possible way. They had let him feel the rhythm of the courtroom, lulled him into believing he could still shape the narrative, that with enough poise and technicality and smirking confidence, he could still come off as the misunderstood genius trapped in a misunderstanding. But with that recording, the mask shattered. Because Prince didn't come with an agenda. He didn't need clout. He didn't want a book deal. He didn't care about trending topics. He was already gone, which made what he said that much more devastating. This wasn't about revenge. It was a warning from someone who had watched it all and finally said, "Enough." The jury was different after that. More alert. More focused. Some stopped taking notes altogether and just started watching Diddy, not as a celebrity, but as a defendant. A man. A man who'd been accused of weaponizing power, money, and fear to build an empire made of smoke and mirrors. And now, that empire was crumbling right there in federal court, one voice memo at a time. And speaking of memos, word spread fast that more might be on the way. Yes, Prince's estate had always been mythologized for its infamous vault, but no one expected it to show up in a courtroom with receipts. And now that the lid had been cracked, everyone from TMZ to legal analysts was asking the same question. What else is in there? Who else did Prince document? Who else was at those parties he warned about? But while the public was speculating, inside the courtroom, the prosecution was already 3 moves ahead. They didn't just stop at the recording. They brought in an expert witness, a forensic audio analyst who authenticated the file, verified the date, the source, the digital trail, said it matched other encrypted files from Prince's catalog, including drafts of unreleased songs, rehearsal tapes, and confidential personal logs. In other words, this wasn't a deepfake. This was real. And that meant everything Prince said on that tape was admissible and unchallengeable. And Diddy, he was visibly spiraling. Couldn't sit still. Couldn't stop twitching. And when the court broke for recess, he didn't go to his waiting room. He went straight to a side chamber with 2 attorneys and didn't come back for almost an hour. When he returned, he looked smaller. Not physically. Psychologically. As if the room had grown around him and he hadn't kept up. The man who once danced on stage with Biggie, who dominated red carpets, who threw the parties no one dared to skip, now looked like someone whose entire playbook had been yanked from his hands in real time. And let's not forget, the prosecution still hasn't unveiled everything. They're dripping the evidence like slow poison, and the more it leaks, the more the walls close in. And if that weren't bad enough, rumor had it that the judge had reviewed additional sealed evidence overnight and was preparing to rule on whether another encrypted voice file, potentially a second Prince message, would be allowed into court. The defense begged for a delay. They argued it was prejudicial, emotionally manipulative, unreliable. But the judge? He wasn't having it. Not after the chaos of the day before. Not after watching the jury react with pure, unfiltered alarm at hearing a man like Prince describe a machine built to exploit the young and silence the weak. This wasn't emotion. It was testimony. And if there were more tapes, the court was going to hear them. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, the culture was shifting. Fans, once split between nostalgia and denial, were now turning. Online forums that used to mock Cassie or treat the allegations like gossip now read like open therapy sessions. People admitting they'd looked the other way for years, that they'd ignored the signs, that they'd assumed wealth and charisma couldn't coexist with cruelty. But now they were seeing it. And not from tabloids. From inside a courtroom. Under oath. Cross-examined. Exposed. And inside the courtroom, more bombshells were about to drop. On the stand next was an unexpected figure, a former producer who worked on one of Diddy's reality shows in the early 2000s. He wasn't there to talk about editing techniques or sound design. He was there to talk about what happened after the cameras stopped rolling, about how young women were invited to rap parties that quickly turned into something else, about how staff were instructed to leave their phones at the door and not interfere unless there was a medical emergency. And most chilling of all, about how one night, Prince himself showed up, stayed for 30 minutes, and left looking visibly disturbed. The producer claimed Prince asked to speak privately and told him, "You need to be careful. This place isn't safe." Boom. Another corroboration. Unprompted. Undeniable. The prosecution tied it all together with surgical precision. They showed emails from that same producer requesting to be removed from future projects. They showed calendar invites that lined up with the dates Prince mentioned. They matched room bookings, travel logs, even rideshare data from one of the assistants who'd left the show after one of the parties got out of control. And Diddy, his team had nothing. No rebuttal. No paperwork. No witness to counter. Just more silence. It's not just a bad day at court when your entire defense rests on claiming everyone else is lying, and now even the dead are calling you out. It's a death spiral. And Diddy's in it. His legal team, once so smug and suited, now looked like interns waiting to get fired. His PR reps? Silent. His brand deals? Vanishing. His fan base? Splintering. Because this isn't just a trial about one man. It's a reckoning with everything that let him rise. The money. The silence. The complicity. And now, with Prince's voice echoing in the chambers of justice, the question isn't whether Diddy can beat the case. It's whether the industry can survive the truth. And judging by what's coming, that answer might be no. The courtroom didn't feel like a courtroom anymore. It felt like a pressure cooker. Everywhere you looked, something was about to explode. The prosecution had more names than time, and the defense? They were running out of sandbags to throw against the flood. You could see it in the way Diddy walked in that morning, not with the usual "I've got this" swagger, but with the cautious energy of someone who knows he's already on fire and is just hoping the building doesn't collapse before he finds the exit. Spoiler: there was no exit. The fire was coming from inside the house, and the match had a purple symbol on it. Because Prince wasn't done speaking from the grave. The court had just greenlit a second audio file, another voice memo, time-stamped weeks before Prince's death. And if the first one cracked the illusion, the second one incinerated it. This time, Prince didn't hold back names. He didn't dance around it. He said it straight. Combs isn't just a man with power. He's a man who abuses it. I saw him control people like puppets. Women. Young boys. He smiles for the cameras, but behind the curtain? He builds cages. Gold-plated, velvet-lined cages. And suddenly, it wasn't just Diddy on trial anymore. It was the entire playbook. The blueprint. The celebrity machine that turned trauma into spectacle and sold silence as success. The jury looked visibly rattled. One juror, a middle-aged woman with years of experience in corporate HR, scribbled something so hard in her notebook that she snapped her pen. The court had to pause so she could get a new one. The gravity of Prince's words didn't just linger, they clung to the walls like smoke. And just when you thought it couldn't get worse, the prosecution dropped the photo. Yeah, that photo. Pulled from an encrypted BlackBerry backup. It showed Cassie, barely recognizable, makeup smeared, sitting on a hotel room floor in a towel, visibly shaken. Standing next to her, Diddy, holding a phone, smiling. The timestamp? It matched the night Cassie testified about, the night she said she was filmed against her will during what Diddy called a freak-off. And right there, in the background, the unmistakable reflection of Prince, in the hotel room mirror. He had been there. He saw it. And judging by that recording, he remembered everything. No more theories. No more accusations wrapped in ambiguity. This was confirmation. Cold, irrefutable confirmation. The gallery gasped. And Diddy? He started talking. To himself. Muttering under his breath. Words like liar, and they edited it, and this is set up. His lawyer leaned in to calm him down, but by then the damage was done. The jury saw it. The press saw it. And the judge. He slammed his gavel so hard the bailiff flinched. "Control your client," he said to the defense. "Or I will." But it was too late. Because what's a defense team supposed to do when the dead start testifying? And they've got receipts? By lunchtime, social media was on fire. Prince predicted everything. Cassie was never lying. Diddy's finished. Trending. Viral. Global. And this wasn't just entertainment gossip anymore. Activist groups started showing up at the courthouse. #JusticeForCassie signs. protesters demanding full investigations into everyone associated with the parties Prince described. There was talk, actual talk, about reopening unrelated cases involving other music execs, other influencers, other names Prince may have recorded. This wasn't a trial anymore. It was a reckoning. And Diddy, he knew it. Because as the afternoon session began, he requested something he hadn't asked for since the start of the trial, a delay. He claimed emotional distress, claimed he couldn't focus, that he needed medical attention. The judge, unmoved. You had every chance to cooperate. You chose not to. We proceed. Boom. Gavel. And just like that, court resumed, with the next witness walking in. A man named Samuel, last name withheld for privacy, who'd worked as a private event coordinator for some of Diddy's most exclusive after parties. The ones where phones were collected, where IDs were scanned, where NDAs were signed and guests were categorized like VIP merchandise, performers, models, talent, service. Samuel looked visibly nervous. But then he said something that turned the courtroom upside down. I signed NDAs too, but I'm breaking them, because I still have the guest lists. And just like that, everyone in the room sat up. Because if Prince was the warning, Samuel was the ledger. He had the names, the dates, the transportation invoices, the hotel blocks. He described how Cassie was always marked under a different code, one that meant she stayed after. He had the codes. He had the flight manifests. He had access to the security rosters that made sure no one snuck out early without being seen. And when asked by the prosecution if he recognized the photo of Cassie sitting on the hotel floor, he said, I took that photo because I was told to document everything, just in case. Just in case what? In case someone talked. Now someone was talking. Everyone was. And Diddy, he couldn't stop it. He tried. He begged. He whispered to his lawyers, again, for a mistrial, claimed media bias, jury tampering, even spiritual harassment. Spiritual harassment? The court reporter didn't even know how to write that down. Because what Diddy was facing wasn't spiritual. It was reality. Reality crashing down, one day at a time, one voice at a time, one memory at a time. He wasn't being targeted. He was being revealed. You know things have gone off the rails when the court staff is whispering to each other like extras in a thriller. By now, they've stopped pretending this is just a high-profile trial. Because this is a runaway train. And Diddy, he's the one holding the torch to the engine. The moment that second Prince tape dropped, the courtroom didn't return to normal. It just recalibrated into a new kind of dread. Because once you let the dead speak, there's no controlling what they'll say. And Prince, in that eerily calm voice of his, wasn't just naming names. He was painting maps. Maps of mansions, basements, back rooms of industry parties where contracts got signed in champagne and silence. Places where loyalty wasn't earned, it was extracted. But today, something shifted. Today, the courtroom floor cracked wide open. Because someone showed up who hadn't been mentioned once. Not by Cassie. Not by Justin. Not even by Prince. But everybody knew his face. A former boy band member. Early 2000s. Platinum records. Disappeared from the spotlight at the height of fame, and now? He's walking into court in a gray suit, fists clenched, lips tight like he's about to throw up his entire past in front of 12 strangers and a federal judge. His testimony started quiet, hesitant. You could see him fighting the urge to run. He said he came forward after seeing Cassie's testimony, after seeing the first Prince recording online. Said he couldn't keep it in anymore. Then the floodgates opened. He talked about the parties. The ones where phones were confiscated before you even made it past the gate. where everyone was on something, but you never saw it poured. Where you'd wake up the next morning in a pool house you didn't remember entering. People would smile at you like nothing happened, he said. And if you asked questions, you got uninvited. He said Diddy never laid a finger on him, but that wasn't the point. He didn't need to. The fear was already in the room before he got there. That line tore through the jury like a lightning bolt. Because up until now, Diddy's team kept pushing this idea that everything was voluntary casual, that these were grown adults in the entertainment industry making adult choices. But now, here was someone, famous, formerly adored, now visibly wrecked, saying what no one wanted to admit. We weren't victims in the legal sense. But we were collateral. We were leverage. We were props in his circus. He paused, looked directly at Diddy, and said, "You remember me now, don't you?" And for a second, for just a flicker, you saw it. Diddy flinched. Not big. Just a twitch. But it was the first honest reaction he'd given in days. That was enough. Then came the exhibit. The boy bander pulled out a necklace. Simple chain. Dog tag pendant. He said he'd found it in a drawer a year ago and couldn't remember where he got it. Then he looked at the back. There was an engraving, "Keep quiet, S." The prosecution moved it into evidence immediately. No context needed. The silence in the room said it all. But the real explosion came after lunch. Because apparently, Diddy had tried to get a temporary restraining order against the release of any further Prince recordings. Mid-trial. In federal court. The judge's response? Laughed. Out loud. Not a chuckle. A dry, brutal exhale of disbelief. "You're not going to censor testimony from the grave," he said. "That's not how justice works." Diddy's lawyer, his fourth since the trial began, stood up to protest and immediately got overruled. "You've had weeks to prepare. You knew this was coming. If you can't handle evidence, withdraw. I won't babysit a failing strategy." The courtroom gasped. Because that wasn't just a judge cracking down. That was a judge issuing a warning. The circus is over. And then it got worse. Because the court clerk announced that Prince's estate had approved the release of 2 more recordings, and that both would be played this week. Suddenly, Diddy's entire team looked like passengers on the Titanic trying to schedule a brunch. The first of the new recordings? An account of an industry retreat in the Caribbean. Prince's voice, still haunting and deliberate, described a villa with blackout windows, high walls, and 24/7 event staff. He said he walked into a room by mistake, looking for the studio, and found 3 girls, no older than 18, sitting cross-legged on the floor, being told not to speak unless spoken to. He left that night and never went back. And just like that, the prosecution had their newest thread, the retreats. You could hear keyboards clacking in the gallery, reporters updating their drafts in real time. Social media was already a wildfire. Hashtag Prince said it. Hashtag industry retreat. Hashtag vault testimony. And inside the courtroom? Panic. Diddy tried to speak. Tried to stand up and ask the judge to suppress the rest of the vault. He got 6 words out before the judge cut him off again. "Sit down, Mr. Combs. You've had your turn." That's when something strange happened. He did. He sat. Not because he agreed. Not because he respected the court. But because, for the first time, he understood he wasn't in control anymore. And for a man like Diddy, that was the final straw. The moment when the music finally stopped. Outside the courthouse, the world was catching on. More celebrities were distancing themselves. A famous model deleted every photo she'd ever posted with him. A legendary producer issued a vague but telling statement about abuse of trust in the industry. Old collaborators started quietly archiving their work with him on streaming platforms. Corporate sponsors pulling the plug mid-contract. Diddy wasn't being cancelled. He was being cleansed. And you could smell it, that panic sweat of a legacy disintegrating, one tape at a time. And guess what? They hadn't even gotten to the Cuba Gooding Jr. connection yet. Because that's the next bomb. According to a sealed affidavit teased by the prosecution, Cuba was allegedly present at one of the party's prints described in the Caribbean recording. Not as talent, not as security, as guest liaison. Whatever that means, we're about to find out. And if that file gets unsealed, Hollywood isn't ready. Because this isn't about Diddy anymore. It's about the circle, the silence, the structure that enabled it all. Drop a comment. Is the third Prince tape going to be the breaking point? Should the government have access to his full vault? And how far do you think this network of complicity really goes? Subscribe and stay strapped in. Because the storm is here. And it's not letting up anytime soon.